Morning, everyone. I'm Richard Holdsworth from Trident Utilities. I'm joined this morning by my colleague, Derek Tonge, who is our head of engineering. And today we're going to be talking about SECR, or Streamline Energy and Carbon Reporting. Morning, Derek.
Morning, Richard.
We've been fielding a lot of calls from customers about SECR recently, and as we can't get out to speak with everyone right now, we thought it would be a good idea to provide this briefing to inform you of some of the issues our customers have encountered to date. So, for those of you not yet familiar with SECR, let's give you a quick overview of the scheme. Derek, what's it all about? When did it start, and who's it for?
Right, Richard. SECR, or SECR as some people refer to it, was introduced, the guidance was introduced back in March of last year, 2019. And in effect, it comes into force as of the 1st of April 2019. And essentially, it's a scheme whereby organisations have to include carbon emissions within their annual report. Now, it's very much looking at two different types of companies. It's quoted companies and unquoted companies. For quoted companies, it's an extension of what they've already been doing as part of their annual report. For the unquoted companies, which is really the main aim of this presentation, it's the inclusion of carbon reporting within their annual reports, which has historically not been done.
Okay, so we've been doing this, or you've been doing this for a little while now. What sort of companies have you been working with so far? No names, please, just sort of the industries and sectors that they operate in.
Well, we're working across a complete mix of sectors, a complete variety. We're working with organisations from charities, housing associations, through into the manufacturing sector. So we've got various different manufacturing industries. So we're looking at automotive, rail, plastic sector, food, the food processing sectors, bakeries, and also in the retail sector. We've got a number of clients within the retail sectors.
Right. Okay. A real broad spectrum then. So you've had some good insights so far today. What is it that companies have to report on?
Okay, right. Well, again, we've got this distinction between quoted and unquoted companies. For quoted companies, and I don't want to talk too much about quoted companies, but it's an extension of what they've already been reporting within their annual statement. So historically, they've been reporting the carbon emissions, etc. But now, for the UK companies, they're having to include all the non-UK elements of the organisation. For unquoted companies, essentially, you're looking to report carbon dioxide emissions associated with the consumption of energy and the operation of the business.
Okay, and as I understand it, Derek, I think companies also have to provide any commentary and information about any action they've been taking throughout the year to reduce their carbon emissions and become more energy efficient. Is that correct?
Indeed, yeah, you're correct, Richard. Part of the requirements for SECR is that on an annual basis, within your annual statement, you report your carbon emissions, but you also provide dialogue in terms of what's happening, how the carbon emissions are changing year on year. And also you're having to provide commentary on what you're doing as an organisation to mitigate emissions.
I can imagine that might be quite worrying for some companies, for those that haven't got an action plan in place or haven't invested in any efficiency measures. Is there any obligation as part of this legislation or any requirement on companies to take some action to become more energy efficient and to use less carbon?
No, there's no legal requirement currently, Richard. However, it's obviously publicly available information, and I think organisations are becoming more and more focused on publicising the successes. Now, successes is obviously one of the main successes an organisation can implement. It is reducing energy consumption, reducing CO2 emissions. So I think it's more a case of using it to promote what you're doing as an organisation and promote where you're being successful.
Well, yeah, it makes good commercial sense too, of course. So I think what we've all seen in more recent times is a lot more stakeholder pressure coming on companies anyway. So future employees want to work for companies that are taking action, positive action in this way. Shareholders want to invest in companies like this, and there are lots of different environmental investors and shareholder action groups. And companies, we see it with large retail, don't we? They put pressure and targets on their own supply chain to take environmental action, positive environmental action in this way as well. So lots of stakeholder pressure, and as you rightly say, lots of good PR opportunities for the companies that do it well. What tell me more about the actual data that companies need to report on. What does it capture?
Yeah, well, the ultimate aim is to we're trying to gather CO2 emissions. Now, what you're gathering to come to those CO2 emission values is essentially primarily energy consumption. So we're looking at how much natural gas, electricity, burning oil, diesel, petrol, etc. The organisation's consuming. So in very simple terms, it's primarily about energy consumption. There are other elements to it, such as refrigerant gases, but that's very much it in a nutshell.
Okay, and for those companies that have facilities overseas, operations internationally, is there a requirement to capture that data as well?
Again, we go back to this distinction of quoted and unquoted companies. Quoted companies, yes, you have to include overseas operations. UK unquoted companies, it's very much UK consumption only. There are certain elements such as oil platforms, etc., that you have to be mindful of as an unquoted company, and ultimately refer back to the guidance if there's any doubts there.
The guidance, that's the 148-page document.
Yeah. The document. Yeah.
Good, happy reading, everybody, with that. Or you could call somebody like Derek or another expert who can summarise the findings for you, which hopefully we're doing some of that today. So, that all sounds fairly straightforward so far, Derek. Not too many issues that I can see, but I know that's not the full story, because you've already, with some of the customers that you've been working with, encountered quite a few issues in capturing the data. Can you expand upon that for us?
Sure, yeah. I mean, typically, most organisations, the obvious things like natural gas, electricity, the consumption data's already being recorded or readily available, be it through their energy brokers or online through the suppliers. The data also includes aspects such as vehicle fuel. Now, that can include company cars, but it can also include private vehicles, whether used for work purposes, which termed the grey fleet, and also the commercial fleet. And that's very much where the data becomes more problematic. Sometimes the sheer volume of data that you're gathering, and where you've got a large commercial fleet, but also when you're looking at the grey fleet, potentially we're actually looking at expenses claims, individual expenses claims in certain instances. So it's very much the more peripheral data, or perhaps what's deemed more peripheral, is the more problematic data. And there are other aspects such as refrigerant gases that pose their own problems.
Okay. I know many of our customers, Derek, they may even be very large consumers of energy, but operate on industrial sites where their supply is contracted through their landlord. Who's responsible for that energy? Is it the landlord capture that in their report, or does the tenant have to?
It's the organisation that has the responsibility for consuming the energy. So in most instances, it will be the tenant. So you will potentially be looking at submetered information. In most instances, as a tenant, you should have submetering from the landlord. But there will be instances, and we've come across some recently, where the client's simply renting an area within an office, and that's based on square meterage. So you then have to define some other methodology for accounting for that energy that they're consuming.
Sure. And again, a lot of our customers have been very forward thinking in this field already, and have invested quite heavily in renewable technologies, on-site generation, CHP plants, solar PV as examples. What about the part of their demand that is satisfied by that on their own generation capacity? Does that have to be reported as well?
Yeah, and I think one thing to be aware of is if you're purchasing green energy, what's termed green energy off the grid, you still have to include that energy that you consume. Now, you can account for that in the reporting, because that's often carbon neutral, but you still have to report that. Self-generation, etc. It's very much you have to consider that on a case-by-case basis, and it's unfortunately referring back to the guidance to look at the specifics of the situation there.
Okay. Okay. I've often heard people refer to the SECR scheme as replacing the CRC scheme. It's obviously very similar in the sense that energy emissions are classified as either scope 1, scope 2 or scope 3. Could you expand on that a little bit more for us, Derek?
Yeah, indeed. The carbon reporting is very much based around the scopes and the energy, the type of energy. It's very much defined as be it scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Now, yeah, likewise with CRC, it was very much about accounting for the energy and defining it within scopes. With CRC, ultimately there was a large cost element at the end of it to buy your carbon allowances. Now, with SECR, it's more a case of gathering the data and reporting it in your annual statement. There's no levy at the end of it at the moment, so there is a distinction.
Welcome news for everybody, I'm sure, not to have to pay another levy. What falls into scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3, Derek?
Okay, I mean, when we're looking at SECR, scope 1 is very much the combustible fuel, so it's the likes of natural gas, diesel, burning oil, gas oil. Those are probably the main elements, but also your refrigerant gases, so the gases that are used in your air conditioning systems or your chilled water systems, for example. Scope 2, very much electricity, and then scope 3, in terms of SECR and unquoted companies, we're very much looking at fuel used in private vehicles. The grey fleet is the primary source of scope 3 emissions. Now, scope 3, all scopes, there are more emissions within that, or more sources of energy within that, but those are going to be the primary ones when we're looking at SECR and unquoted companies.
Great, thank you. Earlier on, you mentioned that companies need to report consumption as an intensity metric. So rather than just number of kilowatt hours of electricity consumed, it needs to relate to something that as a ratio that can be measured. What metrics are companies using? Is there a table, a list? Is there anything specific, or can companies make up their own? What have you used and seen to date?
Yeah, I mean, the requirements for SECR are you calculate your CO2 emissions, but you then rationalise that as you talk about to an intensity matrix, a relative measure. The guidance does offer examples such as FTE, full-time equivalent. It can be pounds of turnover, etc. So there are suggestions within the guidance, but it's very much it's done on a case-by-case basis, and because this measure will be used year on year to compare how you're performing as an organisation, it does take some thought and some care to make sure that you choose the correct measure. It could be tons of product, it could be square meters of floor area, full-time equivalent employee. There are multiple matrices that potentially you could use, but it's very important that you choose a suitable measure from the start, because you measure in year on year against that.
Okay. Are there any particular issues that companies have found in establishing the correct metric intensity measure for them?
I think that the hardest point at the moment is because it's the first year of reporting, and going forward year on year, you'll be reporting against this intensity matrix. It's knowing what measure does give that, what intensity metric does give you that most effective measure of carbon, that relative measure of carbon going forward. That's the difficult element, is really choosing what you think will be representative going forwards.
Right. Well, thanks, Derek. I think you've provided some great insights for us today. One final thing, if I might ask of you, if you could summarise, I guess, what you think are the three most important things that you would like people to take away and consider from today's chat, what would they be?
I think firstly, knowing exactly how SECR impacts on your business or your organisation, and as part of that, when your financial reporting is. For example, if your financial year starts on the 1st of April, we've already completed the financial year, and that data that goes into reporting the SECR requirements should virtually be complete now. So that's the first element. The second element is knowing exactly what data you have to gather. And it's not just about gathering the data, it's making sure you maintain the correct evidence pack an auditable trail of information. And that's important. And also ensuring that you're converting the energy consumption, refrigerant gases, etc., in the correct manner to get to your CO2 to then report. So I think those are the three main elements, but it is a complex process and it's a time-consuming process. So it's really being mindful of when your financial year is and when your financial year ends to ensure that you've got that data gathering process in place already.
Great. Really great insights. Thanks once again, Derek. Just about wraps it up for today. Thank you to everyone for listening. Hope you found it useful. If you do have any follow-up questions or would like further information, please feel free to either direct mail myself or Derek on LinkedIn, or feel free to call Trident's main office number, and you can be put through to Derek, myself, or one of our other colleagues who'd be more than happy to provide further guidance and support that you feel you need. That's it from me. Stay safe, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you when we all get back to normal. Goodbye.
Goodbye.